Hey everybody, we're getting ready for the CUAET Extension watch party with our fine friend right here. Whoa, we got a double whammy going here. I better turn off my other one here. Okay, let's stop this. Here we go. Okay, so I wanted to welcome everybody in here. We need to add Igor in. He is going to connect in. I think he is. Oh, he's calling me. All right, well, just give me a second, you guys. This is where we stay tuned. We're going to get to it in just a minute. That was hilarious. Igor was going to join me in the minister here, but the reality is he was connecting on Teams. So we'll see what happens. So I've got it queued up here and we're just waiting for the announcement to happen. It's going to happen right here. So I'm waiting. And as soon as it goes here, then we will go live. Yes, we will. All right. So we're going to pull in. I'm going to go to my blank screen here and we'll pull Igor. All right, there he is. All right, Igor, we are here. We're here for the CUAET watch party. And I'm just going to make sure that when I'm doing this, when we share the screen, so I'll bring you in and we'll watch it together and then I'll slide over. And when I'm sharing it, I'll just shift over so that we can watch it directly. And let's just see here. I'm going to experiment with something here, Igor. I'm not sure if we can do this. So here, does this work? Yeah, it will work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, this is the fun part. You guys can watch us live. This is how we roll here. So I'm going to take this and then I'm going to duplicate it. Look at that. There's two of me. There's two of me, but not really, because now I'm going to switch it over and make this Igor. Look at that. That's how we roll. Just like that. Boom, blowing your mind. All right. So what do you think, Igor? So
I'm super
the immigration
excited.
measures, do you think it's going to be just the work permit, or is he going to say something else of value?
I think it's going to be very similar to the previous announcement, when too much hype and not too much action.
Then we're just going to extend the work permit. So my
Yeah,
question
exactly.
is, here's my question. Why did this guy right here, okay, let's pull him over here so he doesn't, so he fits in here. Why did he not invite Igor to join him and stand in the background, you know, to wave at people as a prime, you know, candidate for citizenship and everything? Must be because you're already
Apparently,
there.
because I'm not in Toronto, and he's doing this in a cafe. So he went for
Nice.
coffee and decided why not to announce an extension 9 days before the expires.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, we got the minister here, so we'll tuck him over here, or maybe we can float him up here or wherever. He'll be joining us
Yeah,
in
Mark,
a bit. You
and
can. Yes, Igor.
just one thing I wanted to mention. So I see we have about 40 people watching this live, and some of them may be Ukrainian nationals. And so if you are Ukrainian national and you need a translation into Ukrainian language, just let us know in the comments, and I will do a translation as the minister speaks. Because I understand, like, we all speak English here, and that may not be the most convenient way to broadcast this live stream to everyone else.
Here we go.
Baker, who's the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Centre, and James Maloney, who is the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Can
I would
everybody
like
hear?
to start by first acknowledging that we are gathered on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. We're grateful to them for the opportunity that they've given us to live on this beautiful land.
That doesn't look like a cafe, Igor.
It has been over a year since
Yeah, it doesn't.
Russia's brutal assault on the sovereignty of Ukraine, in particularly the Ukrainian people. It is absolutely inspiring to see the resilience of Ukrainians within Ukraine and outside Ukraine as they withstand this brutal invasion of their motherland. The government of Canada and its people remain steadfast in our support for Ukraine, its people, and its government. We continue to use the tools at our disposal to support Ukrainians. Canada has provided $2 billion in financial assistance, extended our military support and equipment, and launch Ukrainian sovereignty bonds to support the operations of the Ukrainian government. Nous avons pris des mesures pour soutenir les Ukrainiens et leurs familles fuyant l'invasion russe, en mettant en œuvre des mesures d'immigration afin qu'ils puissent trouver temporairement refuge au Canada, en réservant des vols affrétés et en offrant des aides à l'établissement pour les aider à demeurer au Canada. Plus de 123 000 Ukrainiens et membres de leurs familles sont venus au Canada grâce à l'autorisation de voyage d'urgence Canada-Ukraine. It has been inspiring for me personally to see how our community right here in my community of Ottawa Centre and across Ottawa has stepped up to help Ukrainians resettle here in Canada. It is really, truly a great symbol of what to be Canadian means. We have a lot more work to do to help Ukrainians in Ukraine and here in Canada. So without
That's
further
pretty
ado,
exciting.
I'm very pleased to welcome Minister Fraser to the podium
right.
to provide an update
we
on
go.
Canada's support for Ukraine. Thank you.
Here we go.
Bonjour et bienvenue. Hello and welcome everyone. Dobry dan. It's wonderful to be here with you to share the latest measures that Canada will be adopting to help continue to support Ukrainians who are fleeing Vladimir Putin's unjust war of aggression. Before I get too far, let me say to my colleagues, MP Nakvi, Baker, and Maloney, thank you for being here. Your continued support for our efforts is very much appreciated. And today in particular, I want to thank our hosts here at Cafe Ukraine. Yaroslav, thank you so much for hosting us today. But more importantly than providing a venue for today's announcement, the support that they've extended to the community over the course of more than a year now. They've shared often 150 to 200 people a week are coming and receiving services here, being welcomed and being treated with respect and dignity. And I can't think of a more appropriate way to share this news than by cooperating with the people who've been providing such graceful supports to people in need over the course of the past year. As Ukrainians continue to contend with the effects of this unlawful invasion, we reiterate our message to Ukraine. Canada will continue to support you. As my colleague MP Nakvi mentioned just a moment ago, certainly the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian territory is under attack, but so are the values that we hold most dear in Canada. My grandfather was a Second World War veteran, and he would remind me when I would ask him questions about his service that you need not fight in a war on the other side of the world to defend the values that we care about most. In particular, the international legal order rests on certain principles like territorial integrity, sovereignty of nations, and the right to self-determination of people, the very idea that people should have a say in who makes decisions that impact the quality of life they get to enjoy. We need to defend these principles, not just with our words, but through our actions. If the UN documents that embed these values are to be worth their weight,
anything, really.
we need to defend them.
You need to
every
do
day.
something about it.
Useless.
Over the course of the past year, we've extended measures to support Ukraine and its people, whether it's the military measures, whether it's sanctions that we've lobbied against Russian officials, or whether it's the adoption of new immigration measures to provide a humanitarian visa to those seeking refuge here in Canada. What I've been most impressed by is not just the action of the government, but the action of Canadians and communities across this country. We've seen them open their arms and open their homes in many cases to welcome some of the world's most vulnerable people. My own parents have welcomed families to provide a temporary place to stay while they got their feet under them after they landed here in Canada. The ability for Canadians to step up to provide supports to people in need should make us all very, very proud. For our part, we've provided Ukrainians and their immediate family members of any nationality the opportunity to stay in Canada's temporary residence for up to 3 years. We've also advanced measures to ensure that they have the ability to work here in Canada or study if they choose. In addition to their permission, of course, we've extended certain supports, which I'll address in a moment. Le Canada continue de soutenir fermement l'Ukraine, son peuple et son gouvernement contre l'invasion illégale et injuste de Russie. C'est pourquoi le gouvernement du Canada a fourni une aide financière ainsi qu'un soutien militaire et des équipements à l'Ukraine. Nous avons également mis en place des sanctions économiques et des sanctions sur le voyage visent la Russie. Les Canadiens, d'un océan à l'autre, ont offert leur soutien et ont ouvert leur maison aux Ukrainiens. Today, I'm pleased to share that we are announcing an extension to the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel to continue to provide a fast and safe way for Ukrainians and their families to travel to Canada. In particular, we will be extending the deadline under which Ukrainians can apply until July 15th, beyond the March 31st deadline that was in place before. Those who are approved will also benefit from an extended period during which they can arrive and will continue to be eligible for some of the supports until March 31st of 2024. We're going to continue to support Ukrainians during their transition to a new life here in Canada after their arrival, even though it may be temporary. This will include continued support for federally funded temporary accommodations that will be available and will continue to provide access to one-time financial assistance to help newcomers into the program meet their basic needs upon arrival. We will also be continuing access to settlement services that have been made available to Ukrainians and their family members. And I want to say thank you in particular to those settlement service providers. You've been helping people learn languages here in Canada, whether it's French or English. You've been helping them find jobs. You've been helping them with some of the soft supports, not just those essential services like housing and employment, but teaching kids where they can sign up for soccer or where people might be able to ride the bus or open a bank account. All of the measures that we've advanced build upon our previous actions to support Ukraine's security and resilience and to hold Russia accountable for its atrocities and crimes. We're going to closely monitor the ongoing needs of Ukrainians and Ukraine to see how we can continue to lend our support and help win this war. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons la prolongation de l'autorisation des voyages d'urgence Canada-Ukraine, afin que les Ukrainiens et leurs familles puissent continuer à se rendre au Canada rapidement et en toute sécurité. C'est incluant nous prolongeons jusqu'au 15 juillet 2023 la date limite à laquelle les personnes se trouvant à l'étranger peuvent présenter une demande. Les personnes dont la demande a été approuvée pourront se rendre au Canada dans le cadre du programme jusqu'au 31 mars 2024. Les Ukrainiens qui s'y trouvent déjà au Canada peuvent demander à prolonger leur séjour au Canada et le gouvernement du Canada continuera de renoncer à tous les frais liés à ces demandes. Nous continuerons à soutenir les Ukrainiens pendant la transition vers une nouvelle vie au Canada après leur arrivée, même si cette transition est temporaire. Les logements temporaires financés par le gouvernement fédéral continueront d'être disponibles. De plus, nous continuerons à fournir une aide financière ponctuelle pour aider les nouveaux arrivants. Nous poursuivons également les services d'établissement offerts aux Ukrainiens et aux membres de leur famille, comme la formation linguistique, à l'aide à la recherche d'emploi et des mesures informelles aussi. Ces mesures s'appuient sur nos actions antérieures visant à soutenir la sécurité et la résilience de l'Ukraine et à tenir la Russie responsable de ces atrocités et de ces crimes. Nous suivons de près les besoins des Ukrainiens et nous adapterons notre réponse si nécessaire. The Canadians have stepped up to help Ukraine. Yevgenia and Christina were welcomed as a 2S LGBTQI couple who wondered where they would be welcomed in the world. I have to say thank you, in particular, to the Hillhurst United Church, where longtime members wrap their arms around people to provide support in their time of need. They chose to come to Canada because of our positive support for the community and because they knew that we wouldn't be seeking to restrict their rights, but instead would embrace them and provide care for themselves. In my home province, in fact, in my own constituency, you can see how people in unlikely communities have stepped up to provide support to vulnerable people. Dennis and Catherine Johnson, an American couple who have a vacation home in the small community of Port Bickerton in Nova Scotia, decided when we announced this program that they wanted to do their part to help. In particular, they offered their summer home to the Shveda family, who's now living in my community, where both parents in the family have found meaningful work and are making a contribution to the community that has offered a warm welcome to them. In particular, I attended the Christmas tree lighting at Sherbrooke Village, a major tourism event every year in my home constituency, where the community came together to invite Misha and Oksana and their children, Rodion, Ilya, and Zachariah, to light the Christmas tree in front of the entire community. What a beautiful scene to see small towns and rural communities, along with big cities in this country, do their part to help support people in need. Our support for Ukrainians who are bravely defending their homes from Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine remains steadfast. That's why we're continuing to provide the ongoing support that I've announced today in helping more people find temporary safe haven in Canada. We are so grateful for the continued work from provinces, territories, municipal partners, as well as settlement service providers who've come together in support of Ukraine. Notre soutien aux Ukrainiens qui défendent courageusement le pays contre l'invasion totale de la Russie reste inébranlable. C'est pourquoi nous continuons à apporter un soutien constant à l'Ukraine et aider davantage des personnes à trouver un refuge temporaire au Canada. Nous sommes reconnaissants du travail et du soutien continu des provinces, des territoires et des partenaires municipaux, ainsi que des fournisseurs des services d'établissement qui se sont unis pour soutenir les Ukrainiens. Et aux milliers de Canadiens qui ont ouvert leur maison, fait de bénévolat et embauché et soutenu les Ukrainiens pendant qu'ils sont ici, merci. I'd like to congratulate all members of Operation Ukraine Safe Haven, including CISA and the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in particular, for their tireless work in supporting Ukrainians here in Canada, as well as in Ukraine. Their partnership has been invaluable in providing on-the-ground information to improve program and policies from the very first day. And to the thousands of Canadians who have helped by stepping up to open their homes, to volunteer, to hire and support Ukrainians while they're here, thank you. Дякую. I'd like now to invite my friend and colleague, Yvonne Baker, to the microphone to share a few words. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un honneur d'être ici aujourd'hui avec vous, avec les membres de la communauté ukrainienne ici à Ottawa et avec mes collègues, les députés. It's an honor for me to be here today. My name is Yvonne Baker. I'm the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Centre and the chair of the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group. It's a great honor to be here with my parliamentary colleagues, of course, Minister Sean Fraser, but also Ottawa Centre MP Yasser Naqvi, my Etobicoke Lakeshore colleague James Maloney. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of the CAFE Ukraine leadership team who are here today, and I know we'll hear more from them in a moment. And the members of the Ukrainian Canadian community who are here, especially the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, for all of your work and all your leadership in communities, not just here in Ottawa, but across Canada. Мені велика честь бути тут сьогодні з вами. І хочу почати, кажучи, слава Україні. My grandparents, Ivan and Olena, immigrated to Canada after World War II, fleeing oppression and seeking a better life. Like generations of Ukrainians who come to Canada since the late 1800s, like the people of Ukraine who are fleeing Russia's invasion today. February 24th marked a year since Russia began its further full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And the Ukrainian people have been severely outnumbered and severely outgunned, but I think they've shown tremendous courage and resolve in defending their homeland. And I think that courage has inspired Canadians and it's inspired people around the world. Notwithstanding that, the situation is dire. Russia is committing war crimes every day. There are millions of refugees. Hundreds of millions of people in the global south in particular are facing famine and food shortages as a result of the war. This war is the primary cause of food and energy price inflation around the world. And this is a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but to Canada's security and to global security. So Ukrainians are not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for us, and we need to be fighting for them. Our government, Canada, has been fighting for them in the form of some of the measures that the minister outlined, whether that be military aid or humanitarian aid, financial aid, sanctions on Russia, and of course, support for Ukrainians who are fleeing the war. Countless millions of Ukrainians have been displaced, and many have had to flee Ukraine to survive, and many of those have come to Canada. Canada has welcomed them on the CUAET visa that the minister just made the announcement about, and Canadians have been so generous in welcoming them, raising money, finding donations, and helping them with some of the things that the minister outlined. So I'm very proud of our government's support for Ukraine in all those ways, and I'm very proud of the measure that the minister has announced today to help Ukrainians who are fleeing the war. And Minister Fraser, I have to say I want to thank you for your leadership, for your hard work, for your determination to make sure Canada is a place that will welcome Ukrainians fleeing the war, but that is also providing those key supports that people need when they are as vulnerable as so many of the Ukrainians are when they come here to Canada. So I thank you for your leadership on that, and I thank my parliamentary colleagues for their support of that. So this announcement today and the extension of the visa, the CUAET visa program, and the benefits associated will allow Ukrainians to continue to come to Canada and to receive the support that they need. I think we can all be very proud, not just here in the room, but as Canadians, of the support that Canada is providing to the people of Ukraine, in Ukraine, here at home in Canada. And so I want to thank all Canadians for their generosity, and I want to thank you, Minister, for this important announcement today. Slava Ukraini. And I apologize. I had another duty, which was to introduce one of the co-founders of Cafe Ukraine, Yaroslav Baran.
Merci, mon ami. On behalf of Cafe Ukraine, an organic, volunteer-based, donation-based project to help displaced Ukrainians, it's a great honor to welcome you, Minister, and your colleagues to our home, a home that we've created to help displaced Ukrainians get their feet under them as they take temporary shelter on Canada's shores. Some 150,000 Ukrainians have already taken haven in Canada since the beginning of this brutal and barbaric war. And we're pleased to have been able to provide various services and supports for them, from English as a second language classes, French as a second language, Ukrainian as a second language for host families, employment seminars, trauma therapy through art sessions, and the list goes on and on. But we're only able to provide this support for Ukrainians because the Government of Canada has generously opened the door for Ukrainians to come and find safe harbor here. In fact, Minister, members of Parliament, the announcement that you've made today is a continuation of a long tradition, 130 years of generous opening of doors by Canada to Ukrainians. So on behalf of our community, I'd like to thank you for your ongoing support for Ukrainians in their darkest hour.
Thank you very much, Yaroslav, and through you, a big thanks to our entire Ukrainian Canadian community here in Ottawa for how they have stepped up, and along with them, the broader community who've been there to support Ukrainians as they are coming and settle here in Ottawa, and we see this across the country. Thank you, Minister, for this important announcement, and I want to thank both Ivan and James for being here with us. I believe this is the opportunity for open the microphones to have questions from our friends from the media, and we'll answer those questions. Thank you.
Hi, it's Isabel here from Media Relations. So we're just going to ask reporters to make their way to the microphone for the question and answer period. We're going to take one question, one follow-up, and we're going to alternate from the floor and reporters that are joining us via the teleconference.
I can guarantee, Igor, that someone's going to be asking about the permanent resident program. I can guarantee.
Exactly.
Et on va alterner entre les gens qui sont en présentiel et les gens qui sont en mode téléconférence. Donc, s'il vous plaît, veuillez vous présenter avec votre nom et votre organisation. Please introduce yourself with your name and your outlet. Thank you.
Bonjour, Boris Proulx du journal Le Devoir. Monsieur le ministre Fraser, j'espère que vous m'entendez bien. Vous avez donné quelques détails ce matin sur la négociation avec les États-Unis concernant l'entente sur les tiers pays sûrs. J'aimerais savoir clairement de votre part qu'est-ce que le Canada est prêt à offrir aux États-Unis pour la renégociation de cette entente.
Merci pour la question. Quand j'ai visité mon homologue aux États-Unis récemment et après le voyager aux États-Unis, nous avons des autres conversations aussi. C'est dans l'intérêt des États-Unis pour promouvoir une frontière avec l'ordre et contrôle, et aussi pour être un bon partenaire avec le Canada. La situation à la frontière du Sud pour les États-Unis est une situation extraordinaire aussi. It's very important that we continue to work with our partners in the United States, but it's not necessarily something that we need to horse trade over. This is something that both Canada and the United States believe in, is having an orderly policy at all of our borders, but also welcoming immigration policies to those who are fleeing violence, war, or persecution. When we're dealing with our partners, figuring out how we can mutually address not just the situation at our border, but also the larger scale issue of irregular migration more broadly is essential. Whatever solution we may work towards as between Canada and the United States, we know that irregular migration is an issue of global concern that's going to require long-term cooperation so we can build capacity in source countries where people feel the need to flee, so we can address the root causes of migration and continue to promote an orderly migration system with welcoming policy. My sense is the United States is willing to be a good partner because they care about these issues more than they want to extract commitments from Canada that serve their exclusive interest.
Combien proches sommes-nous d'une entente avec les États-Unis? How close are we of a deal with the United States? Do you think it will happen right here now this week with the visit of President Joe Biden?
It's not, I want to be very respectful of the conversations I have that are confidential in nature with our partners in the United States, of course. What I can say is we're working towards a solution that will not just deal with political issues that may be in the news over the next few days, but will provide an actual lasting solution. My sense is that there's a willingness with an excellent partner and my counterpart and Secretary Mayorkas because he believes in the need to continue to promote strong policies at our border that maintain open doors for vulnerable people. My perspective is that these conversations need to continue. There's more work to do, but we have no shortage of a partner in the United States who is our largest, most significant, and most important partner in global politics.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, do we have someone queued in on the teleconference line for a question?
Thank you. So if you have a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Si vous avez une question, veuillez appuyer sur étoile 1 maintenant. Our first question over the phone is from Janice Dixon from the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, Minister. Thanks so much for taking our questions today. I'm wondering, and I know you've likely gotten this question before, but I've heard from quite a few Ukrainian families who are really, say they lack support in helping their relatives who have come here or their friends, and, they are treated differently than refugees in that support. So can you explain why the government is going ahead with the visa process instead of the normal refugee program?
Certainly. There's a number of reasons why we chose to launch a new kind of program more than a year ago, and why we're choosing to extend those supports today. At the outset, we came to realize that an ordinary refugee resettlement program did not have the capacity to move at speed or at such a large scale. We made the decision after we had conversations with people on the ground who saw what was taking place, including our ambassador, that we needed to increase the ambition of our immigration response given the enormous scale of people fleeing Ukraine in the early days of the war and, of course, since. Our refugee resettlement programs, because they draw on the annual immigration levels plan, require us to set a finite number and require us to work very closely with different settlement partners and to advance supports that would have limited our ability to help such a large number of people. By creating a brand new program that provides a temporary humanitarian visa, we've been able to leverage the strength of communities, of partners that may be operating on the ground, whether that's organizations or families or employers, to essentially use a modified version of our tourism system, which does not have a cap on the number of people that we can process each year. By moving towards a temporary humanitarian visa, we've been able to help significantly larger numbers of people than would have otherwise been the case. I'm actually quite pleased with the results, despite some lessons we've learned along the way, because we now have a model that can offer temporary protection where it did not exist before. I hope that this can be applied in other circumstances when people do flee a situation that demands temporary protection. Of course, when I speak to the vast majority of Ukrainians who've arrived here, their hope is that Ukraine is going to win this war. They want to go home one day. To create a program that allows them to have temporary safe haven in Canada while we await the circumstances on the ground becoming safe one day for people to return has allowed us to help tens of thousands of people more than would otherwise have been the case under a traditional refugee resettlement model.
Thanks very much for that. And I have a question for a colleague on a different issue. Is it the government's position that the only way to end the migration flow at Roxham Road is to extend the Safe Third Country Agreement across the whole border?
There is so much more to the issue of irregular migration into Canada that needs to be addressed before we can actually have a meaningful conversation about stemming the flow of people who enter Canada in an irregular way. I'd remind those who may be listening that it's people make asylum claims not just by virtue of crossing at Roxham Road, but through a number of other means as well. Although we do need to address the situation at Roxham Road, we also need to advance measures that support people when they're here, but stem the issue before people choose to leave. We need to continue our work in capacity building in Central and South America. We need to continue our work by promoting regular pathways so people see an opportunity to come to Canada that doesn't require them to undertake a lengthy and often perilous journey that puts themselves and their families at risk. There are no simple solutions to an issue as complex and widespread as irregular migration. Part of the solution will, of course, be negotiating a strengthened Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States. But even after that portion of the solution may be advanced, the issue of irregular migration will require our continued efforts and measures to be put forward if we're going to maintain that control at the border with a compassionate policy for vulnerable people seeking refuge in Canada.
Hi, Minister. Rachel Haynes here from CTV National News. So this announcement that you're making today on extending the CUAET, it was about to expire at the end of the month, and as we know, the war is still going on, and there is no way of knowing if it'll be over by the extension that you've given, which is July 2023. Why not wait until the end of the conflict to set an expiration date? And if the war is not over by July, do you promise to make an extension again?
Today's announcement obviously extends only till July 15th, the application period, but we will undertake to continue to monitor the situation on the ground. One of the things that we want to maintain is the ability to manage our immigration system with some certainty. I would encourage people who are thinking of coming to Canada to apply to come, and if you need Canada's protection, to come. Those people who do apply will obviously benefit from a period during which they can come here. The CUAET itself is 3 years, but when we're trying to bake some certainty into the level of support so we can plan not just in the immigration system, but more broadly the amount of support that we'll need to provide to vulnerable people, it helps to create certain time-limited dates on programs. So in addition to the application period, if you're thinking of coming to Canada, we're extending access to benefits for people who may arrive up until the end of March next year. So people who are thinking about coming here, who may be concerned about the situation on the ground, I encourage them to apply, but we will take decisions based on the conditions on the ground as things progress and we understand what policies may be required to continue to support Ukraine, given what they may be dealing with in the future.
Thank you. And my follow-up is looking more broadly at all newcomers to Canada. There's a new report out today that shows that more than 1 million people immigrated to Canada last year, but many people are still struggling to find affordable housing, and new construction is below what experts are saying is needed. So what will your government do to fix this and address the need for more affordable housing for Canadians and newcomers?
Thank you. This is a very important question. Affordable housing and housing more broadly will become a bottleneck one day to Canada's economic growth. We need to continue to pursue growth, including population growth, but we need to continue to increase our ambition when it comes to housing policy, to build more housing stock, to make sure that people are protected at the same time, and to make it more affordable for people to enter the market or receive housing supports if they cannot afford it through below-market affordable housing programs. Minister Hussein and I actually sit immediately adjacent to one another in the House of Commons, and we talk about this frequently. From an immigration policy point of view, there's certain things that we are doing and can do to help reduce the pressure on Canada's housing sector. The first is by creating programs that encourage people to go to parts of the country that have more absorptive capacity than some of our largest urban centres. Of course, our big cities have always been a magnet for newcomers to Canada, but what we've seen over the past few years is explosive growth, including through immigration in Atlantic Canada, for example, through the adoption of the Atlantic Immigration Program. the fastest growing cities in Canada, number 1 and number 2, are Moncton and Halifax. And it's not just those cities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but small towns and rural communities that are seeing people come as well. We've also introduced expanded version of the rural and northern immigration pilot, and we've increased the provincial nominee program numbers. So newcomers to Canada will be spread out across the country in a more equitable way, so to speak. In addition to making sure that we're encouraging people to go to communities that have housing capacity, we're also making a serious change to the federal express entry system that will kick in the second half of this year. For the first time, we'll be able to select newcomers under the express entry system, not just by their overall score, but based on the sector that they work in and the part of Canada that they're going to. I've been clear in my public comments on this new measure to date that we're going to include targeted draws for people who have the skills that are necessary to build more houses. One of the biggest bottlenecks when I speak to developers is not that they don't have projects that they can build, it's they don't have the people to build the projects they're already planning on. By continuing to bring workers into the country that are essential to key sectors that are serving as bottlenecks to growth, including housing, we can actually help use immigration to mitigate against these challenges rather than exacerbate them. Again, no simple solutions, but by looking both in where people go and what people come in, we can help advance solutions to housing rather than treating immigration as a source of the problem.
We don't have anyone on the phone.
Bonjour Monsieur le Ministre, Inès Bardot de Franco-Presse. Est-ce que c'est OK si je pose ma question en français?
Oui, si vous parlez plus long, c'est OK.
OK. Il y a eu une réponse de votre gouvernement aujourd'hui sur l'équité dans les décisions d'immigration. Et votre ministère est partiellement d'accord pour élargir les mesures spéciales aux Ukrainiens, aux populations d'autres pays en crise. Moi, je voulais vous demander si c'était une manière de traiter différemment les personnes qui venaient d'autres pays en crise.
Je m'excuse, c'est difficile pour moi de comprendre les questions.
In English, then?
C'est OK, j'ai envie de pratiquer mon français, mais j'ai donné une réponse en français si possible.
So okay.
Yeah, if you can ask the question, it might help.
Sure. So earlier today, in the government's response, there was a release that your department is... sorry for my English, it's so bad.
C'est mieux comme en français.
So your department states that it's okay for... it is partially agreed with extending special measures to Ukrainian, to populations in other countries in crisis. So I was asking myself, isn't that half of what it says about discrimination against the countries in crisis, other countries?
C'est OK si je donne une réponse en anglais? OK. Look, this is a very important subject. I think we have to be very mindful of advancing policies that don't foster a culture of discrimination. Of course, both internal to government and the outward-facing impact of our policies. It's no secret that over the course of Canada's history, that discrimination, systemic discrimination, is a very real thing. When it comes to the specific policies that we've dealt with here, we've tried to tailor a response that meets the needs of a unique crisis. When we saw millions of people fleeing over the course of weeks, we made a decision to advance a first-of-its-kind temporary humanitarian visa to make sure that the community of nations who are supporting Ukraine came to understand this wasn't a European problem. This was an issue the entire world needed to respond to. By creating the capacity for people who were fleeing Ukraine to come to Canada, we also helped increase the capacity of European nations for whom Ukrainians had access to travel more easily to continue to grow their capacity to help more vulnerable people who had fled. But it's not lost on me that there are other vulnerable parts of the world as well. And we do what we can to respond to the needs of different communities. Just this past weekend, for example, we announced a temporary protection model for people who've been impacted by the earthquake in Syria and Turkey, who will have the opportunity to apply for a temporary residence visa to come to Canada and to have people who are already here to stay. When we saw the events after the murder of Mahsa Amini in Iran, and we met with communities of Iranians who are in Canada now, we heard that the main concern was not the need to create a new refugee program, but to protect people who were already here who had participated in protests. So we advanced new measures to give them an extended period to stay here in Canada. when previously we had dealt with a situation in Afghanistan where we need people who don't have the ability to come temporarily, but would need to come permanently, because the realistic situation is that despite the fact that Afghans love their homeland as much as Ukrainians do, as much as Canadians do, those who fled the Taliban have no realistic prospect of going home. And they're heartbroken when they tell you they would like to, but no, it's not possible. And to the answer I gave previously, we were required to come up with a permanent residency program that relied on the traditional refugee resettlement model with some unique innovations to provide permanent safe haven to Afghans who fled, including those who've served Canada. We're going to continue to see how we can use the lessons we've learned in response to Ukraine to apply them to help more vulnerable people around the world. There's no perfect solution to any one crisis, but we're going to continue to try to tailor our response to the unique needs of an individual crisis, regardless of where in the world it may take place.
Thank you. And what are the main criteria that your department is aiming to determine which persons from countries in crisis will be refugees and who will not?
When we're trying to advance, and we are actually undertaking a strategic review of our immigration policies, including specifically when and how we're going to respond to humanitarian crises around the world. When we look at challenges that other nations in the world may be facing, before we make a decision to launch a new substantial refugee resettlement policy, we look to see whether the events giving rise to the humanitarian crisis trigger a migration crisis as well. In Ukraine, with millions of people fleeing in a matter of weeks, there was clearly a need to respond. In Afghanistan, where people were fleeing the Taliban who'd seized control of the territory and would persecute the people who would remain, it was very clear there was a need to respond. When people who had their homes destroyed by the earthquake on the Turkish-Syrian border lost their homes temporarily, or lost their homes permanently, but desire to go back home, we discovered there was a need to respond with a temporary program. We're going to continue to work to identify the strengths of our immigration and refugee resettlement programs, but also the gaps to understand how we can advance more quickly and more substantial protections for people in need. Of course, the guiding principle will be giving protection to the world's most vulnerable, and over the course of this review, which we expect to be completed by May of this year, we should have a clear understanding of how we can respond and how we can grow our capacity to respond without having impacts across the immigration system, as we've seen has been the case over the course of the past year and a half.
Thank you. That was the last question. I'm sorry. We will take your questions and offer. No.
I know we've got a pretty hard stop, but if we want to follow up, I can try to make myself available subsequently, if that's okay. I think I think we have to get to the House of Commons very soon.
Yeah, that's correct. So I will take your questions and get them to the Minister's office.
And we'll undertake to get you a response in a timely way. I hate walking away from questions when they remain, but we do have a hard stop to get back to the House of Commons before question period. Look, I'll very, very quickly, and that is a question that requires significantly more time than I have right now. We want to work with the Ukrainian-Canadian community to understand what the needs are. There's also some very real sensitivities that the government of Ukraine has expressed, making sure that they still have access to the people who are going to facilitate the reconstruction phase of Ukraine after they win this war. We're going to make decisions not just based on our ideas behind closed doors in Ottawa, but based on engagement with Ukraine, its government, and importantly, Ukrainian-Canadian community. And when we have more to say about long-term visions for what comes next, of course, we'll share that publicly, but not without doing proper consultations with the community first. Look, thank you so much, everyone. I hate to run. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. Merci pour être ici, and we'll look forward to our next conversation. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, there we have it. That was very interesting, to say the least. There was a ton of little nuggets that I don't think, we'll just pause this now, that I don't think people, you know, if you weren't watching for them, you wouldn't realize, Igor. But, you know, just some of the takeaways I'll talk about quickly, and then we'll turn it over and we'll let you answer any questions that, you know, like I've got another, looks like 15 minutes before I have to actually join IRCC to test one of their new systems they're looking to roll out. But yeah, they as Igor indicated, that they indicated right off the bat that they're going to extend it only until July 15th of 2023. And his very last comment was the one that was the most important for me. I think that they are not making decisions independent from Ukraine. So part of the reason that we don't see this big open program for permanent residents, I think, is because Ukraine has asked them not to do it and to hold off. And this is my speculation, but I think that's really what is happening here. And if you look at the numbers, you guys, 943,730 applications have been submitted for the CUAET visa and accompanying work permit. That's almost 1 million Ukrainian citizens. Now, over 616,429 have been approved to date. I'm sure it's still rolling, obviously. So that's a massive number. So there's two things at play here. One is they can't just open a program up for every single person to become a permanent resident of Canada. We don't have the levels plans to support that. So there has to be some kind of a measured way of doing it. And I'm almost positive now that they are in discussions with Ukraine. And he mentioned it. They want people to be able to come back and rebuild when this is all over. And they don't want their population to all leave the country. So I think that's personally why there's been delays with the PR. A couple other things that he talked about in concert with this was the lack of housing and room for people, and that this is a little express entry tip for those that are watching. Construction, absolutely. He said this repeatedly. Why is construction important? To make sure that there are workers that are here that can help to build houses and accommodation for the 1 million or so immigrants that we're bringing in. So those were some of the things. So targeted draws. Then the other thing was he mentioned in the second half of the year. Freak. He said this spring, and now it's the second half of the year they're looking at targeted draws. So does that change things? Maybe it means that we're not going to see something until July again, and that really spring is not the case. But yeah, that is they're extending all of the provisions, the financing, everything. So that's my takeaways, Igor.
Yeah. Я зараз перекладу трохи на українську мову, щоб усім було зрозуміло, про які дати взагалі йде мова. Продовжили дедлайн для подачі на програму CUAET до 15 липня. Але також продовжили і допомогу для українців до 2024 року. І якщо я не помиляюсь, міністр сказав до жовтня, але дивлячись на письмовий репорт, який був виданий по результатам цього анонсу, до 31 марта, березня, продовжується до 31 марта, цікаво, потрібно в'їхати до Канади усім тим, до 31 березня 2024 року, я маю на увазі. Треба в'їхати до Канади усім тим, хто отримав візу. Вони детально не пишуть, до якої дати продовжують цю фінансову допомогу, але я зараз передивлюсь просто ще раз анонс і напишу у себе в Телеграмі або в Інстаграмі, або тут в коментарях під цим відео, напишу, до якого часу вони продовжують цю фінансову допомогу. Так,
Igor, I just want to address this question here, just to make sure that we covered it. Every visa has an expiry date, you guys. So just remember that what drives the ship from when you can enter Canada is the expiry date on that visa. So that's really what drives the ship. If it's been issued, as long as your visa hasn't expired, you can travel and use it to come to Canada.
Mark, can we actually share the screen and show the written report that was issued after this announcement? Because it's very interesting in terms of like what they've announced and what they have written. Зараз ми ділимось екраном і показую вам цей репорт, який був виданий по результатам цього анонсу. Yeah, Mark, if you scroll just a little bit down, there are dates as to a deadline for actually applying for the program. And then the second point is specifically interested.
So they have put, thanks, Igor, for pointing that out. So what this means that every visa that's been issued, okay, this is important for you guys to remember, every visa that's been issued should have a date that expires on March 31st, 2024. If for whatever reason you get a visa that is issued for a duration longer than that, I would argue that the visa stands, not some post on an IRCC website. But generally speaking, it looks like they're going to look to try to cap the flow by March 31st. But understand, who knows what's going to happen? We don't know how this war is going to play out. So that's a factor that people have to be mindful of. And that's to come. So we'll have until March to travel to Canada. But the ability to, who are already here, will have until 2024 to extend or adjust their status through the measures. And this is key, free of charge. But obviously with our law firm, Igor, we have, we can help people navigate their way through other options that might be available as well, depending upon the circumstances. So,
Mark, do you recall what was the deadline, not the deadline, the end date for the support that they've mentioned? If I'm not mistaken, that was October 2024.
Yeah. You mean in terms of the like, what kind of support? What do you mean by support?
Well, you've mentioned that Ukrainians will still benefit from all of the services and support, including the one-time transitional financial support. There's a hyperlink on this page that leads you to one-time transitional financial support, but it does not yet include the new end date for this measure.
Yeah. I have to assume if they're looking at this as a drop dead date, like you've got, this is how long they'll have to travel to Canada. I can't see anyone who still has the ability to come up until March 31st not be eligible for the services for some period of time after this date, a reasonable period.
Yeah.
So I can't,
and if I'm not
the program
mistaken,
wouldn't work.
I'll have to watch the announcement once again, because if I'm not mistaken, he mentioned October 2024. То ще раз на українській мові просто про що ми зараз розмовляємо. Що так, ви можете подаватись на програму CUAET до 15 липня 2023 року, але незалежно від того, наскільки часу у вас видана віза, ви маєте приїхати до Канади до 31 березня 2024 року. Тобто не до 31 березня цього року, а у вас ще один рік буде. Трохи більше, ніж один рік, щоб в'їхати до Канади. І продовжують фінансову допомогу до також 24 року. Я передивлюсь ще раз анонс і в коментарях допишу, до якої дати вони докладно цю фінансову допомогу продовжують.
Okay. Did we miss any comments, Igor, that we needed to touch on in the feed?
Yeah, some people are very frustrated in terms of what will happen to those who are still awaiting for a visa, who have not yet received the visa.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that anyone who has submitted an application will get it adjudicated and approved. When they never ever expected to get a million people applying. They never did. And I think that's what's affected everything from their original promise of a family class, like a permanent resident program for families. If anything, I could see them potentially doing that and following through with that, but a more open amnesty like they did for essential workers during the pandemic and international students, I really can't see that happening myself. Just because of the levels plans that Canada has, and I'm almost positive pressure from Ukraine itself, and people naturally, their expectation is that the majority of people will want to return back to Ukraine. And that's why they're not as motivated to create a pathway to permanent residence, because, hey, you're here, you're working, we give you a little bit of money to kind of get set up and to work and support yourself. And then it's temporary. It's designed not to be permanent, but to go back.
And Mark, my take on it is, let's look at the numbers. So as of March 16th, 943,000 Ukrainians have applied for the program, right? Of them, 616,000 applications have been approved, and I'm rounding the numbers up.
Yep.
However, only 190,000 Ukrainians traveled. So they've issued 600, only 1/3 of those people actually traveled to Canada. So the question is, why the number is so low? Whether people just get the visa for their let's say, male relatives who are still stuck in Ukraine, just in hopes for them to be able to come over when the war is over, when the martial law is lifted, or they just get visas to, just for the sake of it, you know, just to have some visa history in their passport, you know, and have a better rate of approval later on if they would, for example, apply for a US visa in the coming years. So what is your understanding of why the numbers are so low?
I don't, and that's something that I don't have an answer for. I welcome, you know, to our listeners, those that are watching, do you have an answer for this? Why are people not choosing to travel and take up these, the actual visas? You can see here, I'm just trying to post these so people can see. So we've got, essentially, we've got 943,730 applications submitted, 616 approved. And you said, Igor, how many did you say were actually traveled? 170. Okay.
970. Перекладу зараз на українську це питання, цю дискусію. Одним з факторів, чому уряд в Канаді нічого не повідомив про програму для резидентства на цьому етапі, можливо, це відбудеться в майбутньому. Але якщо ми подивимось на цифри, 943 тисячі заявок було подано на цю програму CUAET, 616 тисяч було видано, але приїхало до Канади всього 190 970 людей. Невідомо, скільки з цих людей вже повернулось назад. І одна з наших гіпотез полягає в тому, що в прийнятті цих мір канадський уряд консультується також з українськими колегами і намагається зрозуміти ситуацію, яка відбувається в Україні, і намагається зробити цю програму таким чином, щоб люди могли повернутися до України по закінченню війни і допомагати в розбудові країни. Так, зараз перечитаємо цей коментар. Люди поки не квапляться в'їжджати, бо країна дорога, плюс треба підготувати поки документів під майбутній піар. Basically, Leah Nasser says that people are not rushing to come over to Canada because the country is quite expensive and they have to prepare the whole package of documents for their PR application.
Well, that's the question that I have. There is no PR application that is a direct pathway for people. They still need to write language tests. They still need to have educational credential assessments assessed if they're going through any of the economic PR programs. So I'm not sure, if people are under a misapprehension that there is going to be guaranteed a pathway. That's the one thing, the message that we need to get out, right?
Yeah, I see there is a comment from Mary Suprun. She says it's very cold.
There you go. But is it not cold in Ukraine as well?
Yeah, it can be quite cold actually, and it depends on what you compare to. Like if you compare Ukraine to Ontario, it might be colder in Ontario in winters because of the humid in the air, right? Mm-hmm. It's a bone-chilling cold. Compared to Alberta, it's not as bad. Especially this year, we had a pretty good winter.
Yeah, Alberta is the great place, right? Excellent.
Yeah. There's also another comment, Mark, that I think. Okay, so Кінрад Підпільний пише.
Did we do this one? We did that one already?
Як буде з чоловіками, які вже отримали візи, але не можуть виїхати з України, поки не закінчиться війна і не відмінять воєнний стан? Дуже гарне питання. Зараз я його перекладу на англійську мову. What will happen to those males who received visas but cannot leave Ukraine until the war is over and until they lift the martial law? And I guess the answer is there's no solution for that. Until March 31st, you have to leave the country. You have to enter Canada until March 31st, 2024.
At least at this stage, right? This is what they've said at this stage.
Yeah. На даний момент, з того, що відомо, що, на жаль, нема порятунку в такій ситуації. Вам потрібно приїхати до Канади до 31 березня 2024 року. Тому лише остається сподіватися, що війна закінчиться до цього часу, і ви зможете покинути Україну і приїхати до Канади. Якщо ні, то я так розумію, що з того, що відомо наразі, ваша віза просто не буде прийматись.
Well, we've got about 1 minute here to wrap up. Yeah, and then I literally have to jump over on a call with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, where I'm giving them feedback on their new portals, or I'm not even sure what it is this time. I volunteer for everything. So there we
Mark,
go.
actually,
I agree with Nikita here. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
Igor
Nikita
is
is actually traveling to Canada tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, and he's destined to Manitoba. Very excited for him to arrive here. He's gonna do great. Actually, Mark, can I ask you real quickly if you can pull the previous comment from level 2 travel?
Was it this one?
It could be this one, but there is another one. Yeah, this one. So it basically says that they have applied in May last year, and it will be almost a year by now that they're still waiting for their visa to get approved.
Really?
So in those situations, would we recommend mandamus application with Cedric?
Well, that it's possible, right? It is possible, because that's like, I wonder if something didn't go wrong. Like, there's no way they can keep track of 1 million applications, and so it's possible. And so in those circumstances, it may be something that the people should consider.
В вашому випадку, якщо ви подались в травні і вже чекаєте майже рік, один з варіантів, які ви можете застосувати, це mandamus application. Це, умовно кажучи, заявка, яка примушує якийсь державний орган прийняти рішення. Тобто є вірогідність того, що ваша заявка просто потрапила до якогось довгого ящику і її просто не відкривають, і невідомо, чи відкриють взагалі. Тому ви можете подати цю заявку на примушення цього органу до дії. І, можливо, це врятує вашу ситуацію.
All right. Well, we're going to have to wrap that up, Igor, but thank you everybody for tuning in. And as we learn more, we'll be here to share it. So I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer. I've been practicing for over 20 years and, well, just about 20 years. And I was a former immigration officer, and Igor is working with us. He's soon to start his articles. He's gone through a long path to become a lawyer here in Alberta, and he's just about there. So we're excited to have him joining us in a couple months here, transitioning as a huge benefit to the firm and our infrastructure. Now he's going to help on the immigration side, but he's been working within immigration for the last 3 years. So I'm excited to have him join me as an articling student and start providing legal services through our firm as he works under me and then gets his own license. So thanks, Igor, so much. Yeah. And I better jump over, otherwise IRCC will be wondering where I am. All right, take care, guys.
Subscribe, and we'll see you later.